Hey everyone, welcome to the August 2021 Region 1 History Feature. I'm Presley Fowler from Region 1 Communications, and today I'm joined by Jamie Shapiro, the staff historian for Region 1. And this month we're talking about historic buildings in the City of Lakewood, 6th and Wadsworth Interchange Improvement Project, the future project for CDOT Region 1. And our Region 1 historian team got involved as part of the historic mitigation for the project, working with the City of Lakewood on historic preservation study for this. So we've got Jamie here to talk a little bit about the research. And Jamie, I understand this is a result of the interchange improvements at 6th and Wadsworth that we're talking about in Lakewood. So can you tell me a little bit about that project and why it resulted in this larger history study?
Yes, I can. Thanks so much, Presley. Great to talk to you, as always.
You too.
As you were mentioning, this is a project that's in CDOT's 10-year plan to improve the intersection at 6th and Wadsworth. And it started back in 2007 with an environmental assessment and some of the early work. And I think around 2010, there was funding to buy some of the right-of-way. It's a very tight interchange there with CDOT right-of-way. So CDOT purchased 4 properties, ended up demolishing 4 houses that were considered historically significant after purchasing them. And that triggered us getting involved with this historic mitigation effort. So basically as a way to work with the City of Lakewood to mitigate the impact of tearing down those buildings, we undertook this larger preservation study to help the city.
How did you guys decide to do a study on the pre-1920s buildings in Lakewood? What's the connection to this project?
Yeah, so really it came from the City of Lakewood themselves. So we were working with them and figuring out, basically came to them and said, hey, what are the preservation projects that you need done in the City of Lakewood? What are the kind of priorities? And they have a pretty new historic preservation program within the City of Lakewood planning. They basically did a historic preservation plan back in 2012, and that was kind of the beginning of things. So right around kind of coinciding with when this project was getting going, that first phase. And we talked to them about a lot of different options we could do. We talked to them about helping them with their website for their historic preservation. We talked about helping them with the actual physical preservation of some of the historic buildings that the city owns. And then we also looked at some of the studies that they'd done previously. The 2 studies that they had done initially were along West Colfax, which is kind of the oldest part of Lakewood, and then around another one in that northeast corner of Lakewood. And both of those talked about the need to study the early buildings of Lakewood throughout, because there's a long kind of agricultural history and early streetcar commuting and that kind of thing that actually goes back all the way to the 1860s, 1870s. And that hasn't been well documented. So what we landed on was doing a study of the buildings that were built in Lakewood before 1920. So kind of the first phase, that was something we came up with the City of Lakewood planners, and just identified that as something that was manageable, and looking at those buildings and then trying to help them prioritize them for future preservation.
Can you talk through the process of conducting the study and some of the results?
Yeah, it was a really interesting project. One of my favorites that I worked on at CDOT. We worked with another firm, Pinion Environmental, as well. So there were kind of 4 of us historians working on it, myself and Barbara from CDOT, and then 2 historians from Pinion. And it was quite a long process. It was maybe 2 years to kind of go through the whole study. Did a lot of data collection at first. So basically figuring out what buildings were built before 1920. So getting data from the county, from City of Lakewood, from History Colorado, basically just spreadsheets, and then going through them and figuring out which buildings were still around, which ones had been torn down since then. And there actually turned out to be about 200 buildings built before 1920 that are still standing in Lakewood. And 93 of those have not been surveyed or looked at for historic significance. So we narrowed it down to that 93. Then we did a whole kind of mapping and analysis effort. So this map shows Lakewood, the evolution of buildings. You can see the ones built by 1880, and then by 1900, and then by 1920. So this was really fun to put together some of these maps to show kind of how the city evolved and where the old buildings are located. And then we did another map, which is my favorite, that shows the railroad, the irrigation canals, and the historic building. So you can get a sense of some of the important like early infrastructure, that goes back to the 1800s and early 1900s, and why people settled where they did. And then we actually visited the 93 buildings. So between the four of us, we visited all of them, took photos, took notes in the field. Yeah, so that was pretty extensive. And a lot of that was like during the winter, which actually is better for this, as I'm learning, because there aren't leaves on the trees, so you can actually see the buildings. So that was interesting.
Oh, that's an interesting aspect. What winter would this have been that you guys were doing the site visits to the
It was before COVID, so it would have been 2019.
2019, okay.
And then we finished basically the summer of last year.
Okay, great. Before we move on, I did want to ask, and I meant to ask earlier, what the photo is behind you, what that building is, and maybe we're going to get into it later.
Yeah, great question. This one wasn't part of our study because it had been previously looked at, but it's the oldest house in Lakewood, according to the city and their preservation program. It's just known as the Stone House, and was built between 1860 and 1864. The oldest building that's still standing, that is. And then this photo was taken after it was renovated in the 1970s.
So as you guys were doing this, you and Barbara went out and tag teamed, and you were visiting these 93 properties in the city of Lakewood that were built before 1920. As you were doing that, were there any specific properties in Lakewood you found especially interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely got to know Lakewood well driving through the community. A couple of the properties that come to mind, there's one on South Pierce that's a large farmstead that's still has very high integrity. You can really see how it looked at the time. So it was built in 1899. There's a large farmhouse, there's a barn, there's some outbuildings. It's on a large parcel. So you get the sense of what it would have been like to be on a farm in Lakewood out in the countryside at that time around 1900. Here's another couple of houses that are interesting for their architecture. One is on South Harrington and one is on Lake Ridge. And they're built in the French eclectic architectural style, which is interesting. There aren't a lot of these houses in Lakewood. These are the only two that we looked at. And this style is interesting to me. It was popular right around World War I. A lot of the veterans that were coming back from that war that had been in the French countryside and seen a lot of the beautiful architecture there came back and wanted to have houses built in that style. So all over the US, you saw a lot of houses with some of these French eclectic elements. So that's pretty neat to see in Lakewood. Cool. And then this one on Fenton Street in Northeast Lakewood is the oldest one we looked at in our study. It was constructed in 1877. It's a pretty modest house, like a lot of these older historic homes in Lakewood, but just neat to see. I mean, you can kind of get a sense of what it might have been like to live on a small farm in the 1880s and kind of what was then kind of rural Lakewood.
Yeah, absolutely. As we wrap up, how's this work going to help the city of Lakewood moving forward? And then how will it help CDOT, I guess, specifically in connection to the 6th and Wadsworth interchange improvements in the future?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the City of Lakewood preservation program is quite young. It's only, less than 10 years that they've really had a concerted effort to understand the history. So this was really helpful, and the city was really appreciative, and the community just having more data, more information on these early buildings and what's kind of historically significant. I think for CDOT, it's important for a couple reasons. For one, it satisfies our legal obligation to mitigate the impact that we had on those historic buildings. But it also helps us to just build a really strong relationship with the city of Lakewood and to work with the planners and to show that we're kind of committed for the long term to help them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great to discuss this, especially how CDOT is working collaboratively with localities like Lakewood, and always great to learn more about the history of the Denver metro area. So thank you, Jamie, for all the info about that. And we hope you guys enjoyed this month's history feature. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Presley.
See you next time.